the only dropout lucky enough to marry success.
I heard you. The founder has remained hidden for 12 years, and today, the world finally meets.
Dennis Carter was 39, a quiet commercial maintenance contractor who spent more time repairing office buildings than speaking inside them. His wife, Audrey Carter, 37, stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Langham Chicago, celebrating her promotion to Executive Vice President of Meridian Healthcare Technologies. Everyone in the ballroom believed Dennis was simply the college dropout who had failed while Audrey conquered Harvard. His worn work boots, weathered hands, and aging Ford F-150 only reinforced the story they wanted to believe. What none of them knew was that Dennis owned something far more powerful than any executive title in that room. Then Audrey lifted her champagne glass, smiled at the crowd, and called him the only dropout lucky enough to marry success. Laughter exploded through the ballroom as Dennis quietly set his wine glass on the table, his fingers tightening around the stem for just one silent second. If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, leave a comment telling us your country and your local time. I always enjoy seeing where these stories are reaching. And if you love slow-burning stories where patience, truth, and quiet strength win in the end, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story may change the way you look at the quietest person in the room. 12 years earlier, before executive boardrooms and luxury hotels became part of Audrey Carter's world life, looked surprisingly ordinary. Dennis Carter still believed that hard work alone could solve almost every problem. The University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign spread across the autumn landscape in shades of gold and deep orange. Engineering students hurried between laboratories carrying overloaded backpacks, while football fans filled Green Street every Saturday afternoon wearing orange and blue. Dennis was 27, then older than many of his classmates because he had spent several years working construction after high school, before finally saving enough money to attend college. He never complained about being older. He simply arrived before every lecture. His professors knew him as the student who asked practical questions instead of theoretical ones. While others chased perfect grades, Dennis wanted to understand how machines actually failed. He loved solving problems. If a hydraulic system malfunctioned, Dennis wanted to know why. If an automated conveyor stopped unexpectedly, he wanted every bolt sensor and circuit diagram spread across the table before making conclusions. That habit would eventually define his entire life. At the business school across campus, Audrey Bennett stood out for entirely different reasons. She possessed effortless confidence. Classmates admired how naturally she spoke during presentations. Professors praised her ability to analyze market trends within minutes. She dreamed of corporate leadership long before graduation. Dennis first noticed her inside the university library. Not because she was beautiful, because she looked frustrated. 3 accounting textbooks lay open beside her laptop, while dozens of handwritten notes surrounded her coffee cup. She stared at a spreadsheet with folded arms. Dennis happened to be searching for an engineering reference book nearby. "You've been looking at that screen for almost 20 minutes, he said with a polite smile. Audrey looked up. "You noticed? You've tapped your pencil exactly 83 times. She laughed. "You counted. I wasn't trying to." That became their first conversation. Neither expected it to last more than 5 minutes. Instead, they walked across campus, talking until nearly midnight. Dennis discovered Audrey wanted to build companies. Audrey discovered Dennis wanted to build systems that made companies work better. The goals were different. The values were remarkably similar. Over the following months, their relationship grew quietly. There were no expensive vacations, no luxury restaurants. Friday nights usually meant frozen pizza inside Dennis's small apartment while engineering blueprints competed for space with Audrey's business case studies. Money was always tight. Dennis repaired classmates' broken appliances for extra cash, microwaves, dishwashers, heating units, anything mechanical. Word spread quickly across campus. If something stopped working, Dennis Carter could probably fix it. Audrey often joked that he could repair almost anything except his own aging Honda Civic. He would grin. It still starts. Sometimes. It started today. After 3 tries. Their laughter filled the apartment more often than silence did. Then, everything changed. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October. Dennis received a phone call halfway through his thermodynamics lecture. His younger sister, Emily, could barely speak. Dad collapsed. The words landed harder than any final exam ever could. Dennis drove 3 hours to Springfield Regional Medical Center without remembering most of the trip. His father had suffered a massive stroke while repairing electrical wiring at a manufacturing plant. The doctors saved his life. They could not save his independence. Weeks turned into months. Physical therapy became daily routine. Medical bills arrived faster than insurance payments. Dennis's mother had never managed the family's finances alone. His sister was still finishing nursing school. Someone had to step forward. Dennis never announced his decision dramatically. He simply stopped registering for classes. 1 semester remained before graduation. Just 1. His academic advisor urged him to reconsider. "You've come too far." Dennis nodded politely. "I know. You could finish next spring." "My family can't wait until spring." There was nothing more to say. He packed his textbooks into cardboard boxes. He never sold them. Some part of him believed he would return. Life had other plans. Within 2 weeks, Dennis accepted a night shift loading freight at a distribution warehouse outside Chicago. During the day, he apprenticed under an experienced HVAC technician. Weekends disappeared into commercial maintenance contracts. Sleep became a luxury measured in hours rather than nights. His hands hardened. His shoulders broadened. His dreams quietly shifted from graduation ceremonies to mortgage payments and hospital invoices. Throughout all of it, Audrey remained beside him. She visited whenever she could. She helped organize paperwork for his father's rehabilitation. She encouraged Dennis not to lose hope. Then another opportunity appeared. Harvard Business School. When Audrey opened the acceptance email, she stared silently at the screen. Dennis immediately understood. "You got in." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I don't think we can afford this." Dennis smiled before she could continue. "We'll figure it out." Harvard's tuition alone exceeded what Dennis earned in many months. Boston rent would add even more. Travel, books, living expenses. The numbers looked impossible. Dennis sat at the kitchen table one Sunday evening with a yellow legal pad and a calculator. He listed every bill, every paycheck, every possible overtime shift. By midnight, he had created a budget that barely worked. Barely. The following Monday, he accepted additional weekend contracts maintaining office buildings throughout downtown Chicago. He stopped taking vacations entirely. He postponed replacing his truck despite repeated mechanical problems. Instead of buying new work boots, he repaired the old pair with industrial adhesive. Audrey protested. "You don't have to do all this," Dennis answered without looking up from the invoice he was reviewing. "I'm investing. In me. In us." She crossed the room and wrapped both arms around him. "I'll never forget this." Dennis believed her completely. Over the next 3 years, their relationship survived almost entirely through late-night phone calls and occasional weekend flights when discounted tickets became available. Dennis never mentioned exhaustion. He simply listened. He listened when Audrey celebrated successful presentations. He listened when she worried about difficult professors. He listened when imposter syndrome crept into conversations after midnight. Every time she doubted herself, Dennis reminded her she belonged there. He mailed handwritten notes inside care packages, protein bars, winter gloves, coffee gift cards, simple reminders that someone believed in her. She graduated near the top of her class. Dennis stood in the audience wearing the same navy blazer he had owned for nearly a decade. He applauded louder than anyone. Nobody around him knew he had quietly sacrificed his own degree to make that moment possible. Dennis never told them. Recognition had never been the reason. After the ceremony, Audrey squeezed his hand. "Our real life starts now?" Dennis smiled. He believed it did. Neither of them realized another chance was already waiting. 3 months later, while repairing a malfunctioning climate control system inside the Chicago Federal Center, Dennis solved a technical problem that several government contractors had failed to diagnose. An older man wearing an FBI visitor badge watched him silently for nearly 15 minutes. When Dennis climbed down from the maintenance ladder, the stranger extended his hand. "My name is Benjamin Hayes," he said. "I think we've been looking for someone exactly like you." Dennis frowned, unsure whether the man was joking. Benjamin wasn't smiling. Benjamin Hayes did not look like the kind of man who impressed people by walking into a room. He wore a plain charcoal jacket over a blue Oxford shirt with no tie. His gray hair was trimmed short, and a thin scar disappeared behind his left ear. Only the calm way everyone inside the mechanical room stepped aside when he approached suggested that he carried unusual authority. Dennis wiped grease from his hands with an old shop towel. "I appreciate the compliment," he said, "but all I did was replace a damaged sensor." Benjamin glanced toward the silent climate control unit. "No," he shook his head once. "You found the real failure." Dennis looked confused. The sensor wasn't the problem, it was the symptom. Benjamin smiled slightly. "Most contractors replace broken parts. You spent 15 minutes proving the software logs didn't match the mechanical failure." Dennis shrugged. It didn't make sense. "Exactly." Benjamin studied him for another moment before reaching into his jacket pocket. He handed Dennis a simple business card. No logo, no decorative design, only one name: Benjamin Hayes, Cyber Investigations Consultant. A phone number, nothing else. "If you're ever interested in solving bigger problems than broken air conditioning units," Benjamin said, "give me a call." Dennis slipped the card into his wallet. "I don't know anything about computers." Benjamin almost laughed. "I don't care." He pointed toward the repaired equipment. "You understand systems. There isn't much difference." Then he walked away. Dennis forgot about the conversation within a few days. Life left little room for curiosity. His calendar remained packed with maintenance contracts across downtown Chicago. Office towers, medical clinics, distribution centers, commercial warehouses. By 6 every morning, he was already loading tools into his aging Ford F-150. By 8 every evening, he was usually still working. Meanwhile, Audrey had accepted a management position at Meridian Healthcare Technologies. The salary was more money than either of them had imagined earning. They celebrated with takeout burgers because neither wanted to spend unnecessarily. "I'll finally start carrying my weight," Audrey joked. Dennis smiled. "You've always carried your weight. You've been supporting both of us for years." "We supported each other." She reached across the kitchen table. "I mean it." "I know." At that moment, Dennis believed the hardest years of their lives were finally behind them. 3 weeks later, his phone rang while he was replacing electrical panels inside an office building near the Chicago River. Unknown number. Normally, he ignored those calls. Something made him answer. "Dennis Carter." "Benjamin Hayes." Dennis immediately remembered the business card. "You still fixing machines?" "Mostly." "I have coffee." Dennis laughed. "I wasn't aware coffee required repairs." "It doesn't." Benjamin paused. "But I have a problem that does." Curiosity finally outweighed caution. They met Saturday morning inside a small coffee shop near Millennium Park. Benjamin arrived carrying an old laptop instead of a briefcase. He placed it gently on the table. This belonged to a manufacturing company. Dennis waited. "It controls one of their automated packaging lines." "So?" The system keeps shutting itself down. Dennis frowned. Didn't their IT department check it? They've had 4 different consultants. And they all blamed software corruption. Benjamin rotated the laptop toward Dennis. I'd like your opinion. Dennis hesitated. I've never done cybersecurity. I'm aware. Benjamin simply watched. Dennis opened the diagnostic logs. For several minutes he said nothing. Customers entered and left the coffee shop unnoticed. Finally, Dennis asked one question. Where are the maintenance records? Benjamin leaned back. I didn't bring them. I need them. Why? Dennis tapped the screen. The shutdowns happen every Tuesday. Benjamin nodded. So, mechanical inspections happen every Monday. Benjamin remained silent. Dennis continued. If the software was corrupted, failures would be random. He pointed at another graph. They're not. They happen exactly 24 hours after maintenance. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. Dennis continued reading. Someone replaced the wrong pressure sensor. But the software compensated temporarily. He flipped to another file. Every Tuesday production increases. The system exceeds safe limits. The software shuts everything down intentionally. Benjamin smiled. What else? Dennis looked up. It isn't an IT problem. It's poor maintenance. The software actually prevented equipment damage. Benjamin slowly closed the laptop. You solved that faster than 4 cybersecurity consultants. Dennis shrugged. They were looking at computers? I looked at the machine. Benjamin nodded. That's exactly why I called you. Over the following months, Benjamin continued inviting Dennis to small consulting projects. Nothing classified, nothing illegal. Mostly technical puzzles, manufacturing failures, digital equipment logs, industrial automation records. Dennis discovered something unexpected. The same logical thinking that helped him diagnose hydraulic systems also applied to digital evidence. Broken machines left clues. So did corrupted databases. A failed conveyor belt, a deleted email, a damaged circuit board, a manipulated accounting file. Everything followed patterns. Everything left traces. Benjamin noticed Dennis teaching himself faster than anyone he had mentored before. You read forensic textbooks now? Benjamin asked one evening. Dennis looked embarrassed. I borrowed them from the library. You finished 300 pages already. I couldn't sleep. Benjamin smiled. You found your field? Dennis wasn't convinced. I'm still just a maintenance contractor. Benjamin folded his arms. That's where you're wrong. He leaned forward. You think cyber investigations are about computers. They aren't. They're about finding truth. Dennis listened carefully. The tools change. The evidence changes. But people always leave fingerprints. Sometimes they're digital. Sometimes they're financial. Sometimes they're hidden inside systems nobody else bothers to understand. Dennis drove home thinking about those words. For the first time since leaving college, he felt something waking inside him. Not regret. Purpose. His routine slowly changed. He still worked maintenance contracts during the day. At night, he studied programming, network architecture, digital evidence preservation, federal chain of custody procedures, financial transaction mapping, cloud infrastructure, encrypted storage, database reconstruction. He learned everything he could. His small apartment slowly transformed. Engineering textbooks returned to the shelves. Beside them appeared cybersecurity manuals, federal investigative guidelines, programming references, digital forensic case studies. Audrey noticed immediately. When do you sleep? Dennis smiled. Eventually. You've been reading until 2 every morning. I'm learning. She looked around the apartment. Planning to change careers? I don't know yet. But I think I finally found something. Audrey kissed his forehead. I've never seen you this excited. Months became nearly 2 years. Benjamin introduced Dennis to retired prosecutors, former Secret Service investigators, financial crime analysts, cybersecurity engineers. Each taught him another piece of the profession. Dennis absorbed knowledge quietly, never trying to impress anyone, never pretending to know more than he did. Benjamin admired that quality. "Confidence without ego," he once told another investigator. "That's impossible to teach." Eventually, Benjamin proposed something far larger than another consulting assignment. The idea came during dinner inside a quiet steakhouse overlooking the Chicago River. Benjamin spread several documents across the table. "I've spent 30 years working investigations." Dennis listened. "I've testified in federal court. I've built teams. I've trained analysts." Benjamin paused. "But I can't build what comes next by myself." Dennis looked at the paperwork. Articles of incorporation, business formation documents, operating agreements, insurance applications. "What is this?" "A company," Benjamin answered calmly. "A forensic investigation firm." Dennis stared at him. "I can't afford to start a company." Benjamin smiled. "I'm not asking you to finance it. I'm asking you to build it." Dennis looked down again. The proposed name appeared across the first page. "Sentinel Integrity Solutions." Benjamin continued. "I'll become the public face. I already have government relationships. You stay behind the scenes. You design everything. The investigative platform. The analytical methods. The technology." Dennis looked unconvinced. "Why hide me?" Benjamin's expression became serious. "Because clients trust familiar names. They trust former federal officials. They don't hire unknown contractors." He leaned closer. "But one day," Benjamin tapped the papers, "they'll be trusting your work. They just won't know your name." Dennis sat silently. Outside the restaurant, traffic flowed along Wacker Drive beneath the glowing skyline. He realized this decision could change everything. After nearly a minute, Dennis picked up the pen. Without another word, he signed his name. Neither man noticed the waitress quietly refilling their coffee. Neither realized that one signature had just begun a journey that would eventually place Dennis Carter at the center of one of the largest corporate fraud investigations in the country. Sentinel Integrity Solutions officially opened inside a modest office on the 12th floor of an aging commercial building in Chicago's West Loop. There was nothing impressive about the space. Gray carpet, second-hand desks, used computer monitors purchased from a corporate liquidation sale, a conference room with mismatched chairs. Even the coffee maker had been bought from an online marketplace. Benjamin Hayes looked around the office on the first morning and laughed. "If anyone walked in here," he said, "they'd think we were going bankrupt." Dennis smiled while assembling another workstation. "Maybe that's an advantage." Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "How? No one expects anything." Benjamin nodded slowly. "You're going to enjoy investigations." Unlike most startups chasing publicity, Sentinel deliberately stayed invisible. Benjamin handled every client meeting, every interview, every conference appearance. His decades of federal experience gave clients immediate confidence. Dennis rarely attended meetings. Instead, he built the systems behind them. He designed forensic software that organized millions of electronic records without altering a single byte of evidence. He created verification tools that documented every file movement with exact timestamps. He insisted every report could withstand the most aggressive courtroom cross-examination. Benjamin often joked that Dennis trusted documentation more than human memory. Dennis never argued. "Documents don't get emotional," he replied once. "They either prove something or they don't." Within 18 months, Sentinel began attracting attention from agencies that normally hired only much larger firms. The company never advertised. Its reputation spread quietly through successful investigations. One solved procurement fraud case led to another. One financial tracing assignment became 3. A Department of Justice attorney recommended Sentinel to another agency. Soon, federal contracts began arriving one after another. Benjamin became recognized nationally as the experienced former investigator leading an unusually effective forensic team. Very few people ever asked who designed the technology. Benjamin preferred it that way. So did Dennis. The company's ownership structure reflected that decision. Benjamin appeared publicly as Chief Executive Officer. Dennis held the controlling ownership through carefully drafted legal trusts and limited liability entities. Everything was completely lawful. Everything had been reviewed by experienced attorneys. Everything intentionally kept Dennis's name away from public attention. Benjamin explained the reasoning one afternoon. Government contracts attract attention. Dennis nodded. So do lawsuits. So do competitors. So do reporters. He leaned back in his chair. You still repair commercial buildings. Nobody connects that man with the owner of Sentinel. Dennis understood. Privacy was not deception. It was protection. While Sentinel quietly expanded, Audrey's career accelerated even faster. Harvard opened doors that few people ever had the chance to enter. Meridian Healthcare Technologies promoted her from strategy manager to director in less than 3 years, then to senior director, then vice president. Each promotion came with larger bonuses, better benefits, more responsibility. Eventually, the couple purchased a beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park. Friends congratulated Audrey on her extraordinary success. She deserved much of it. She worked relentlessly. She prepared for every presentation. She understood corporate politics better than almost anyone around her. Dennis admired her determination. At first, nothing seemed different. She still thanked him for supporting her. She still celebrated promotions with simple dinners. She still introduced him proudly as her husband. Then the small changes began, almost too small to notice. During one dinner with coworkers, Dennis mispronounced the name of a French restaurant. Audrey corrected him immediately. Not quietly, publicly. Everyone laughed politely. Dennis smiled and corrected himself. He thought nothing of it. A month later, at another company event, an executive asked Dennis where he had gone to college. Dennis answered honestly. I left engineering school before graduation. Before he could explain why, Audrey laughed lightly. He never lets anyone forget he's the smartest college dropout in Chicago. The table laughed. Dennis laughed too, but something about the comment lingered longer than expected. Driving home that evening, Audrey noticed his silence. You're awfully quiet. I'm fine. I was joking. I know. You aren't upset. Dennis glanced through the windshield. No. Technically, that answer wasn't true. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. Not because she mentioned college, because she interrupted before he could finish his own story. Over the following year, those moments became more frequent. Whenever new executives visited their home, Audrey introduced Dennis almost the same way. This is my husband. He works in commercial maintenance. He left college years ago. She never lied. She simply stopped mentioning everything else. She never mentioned Sentinel. Never mentioned federal consulting. Never mentioned that Dennis often spent evenings reviewing encrypted evidence for government agencies after finishing physical maintenance jobs during the day. Sometimes she genuinely forgot. Other times, Dennis suspected she chose simpler explanations. Corporate conversations rarely valued invisible work. Executive titles impressed people. Quiet expertise did not. Dennis never corrected anyone. Benjamin occasionally questioned that decision. You know she doesn't understand what you've built. Dennis looked up from a forensic report. I never asked her to. But she's your wife. Dennis nodded. She knows enough. Benjamin remained unconvinced. Does she Dennis changed the subject. Work continued. Months passed. Sentinel received its largest assignment yet. The request came through a federal contracting office with unusually strict confidentiality requirements. Benjamin entered Dennis's office carrying a sealed envelope. No emails. No phone discussion. No cloud storage. Dennis immediately recognized the significance. Benjamin closed the office door before speaking. This comes directly from federal investigators. Dennis opened the envelope. Inside were legal authorization documents, evidence preservation orders, chain of custody instructions. The case involved suspected procurement fraud inside multiple healthcare technology companies receiving federal contracts. Dennis began reading names. Several companies appeared unfamiliar. Then one stopped him. Meridian Healthcare Technologies. He read the page again, the same name. No mistake. Benjamin watched his expression carefully. "You know them?" Dennis answered quietly. "My wife works there." Benjamin said nothing for several seconds. Finally, he asked the obvious question. "Can she be connected?" Dennis continued reading. "No. These names are mostly procurement executives. Vendor relationships. Outside contractors." Benjamin exhaled slowly. "Still." Dennis nodded. "I know." The room suddenly felt smaller. Federal investigations followed strict legal procedures. No one involved could disclose active case information. Doing so could compromise evidence, alert suspects, obstruct justice. Even discussing the existence of the investigation with unauthorized people could create serious legal consequences. Benjamin understood immediately. "You can't tell her." Dennis slowly shook his head. "No." "You can't warn anyone." "No." "You'll have to investigate the company where your wife works." Dennis closed the folder carefully. "If that's where the evidence leads." Benjamin studied him closely. "I can ask for reassignment." Dennis looked out the office window toward the Chicago skyline. Traffic moved steadily below. People crossed intersections without realizing how many invisible decisions shaped their ordinary day. After nearly a minute, he finally answered. "If someone else takes the case because of me." He paused. They might miss something. Benjamin understood. Dennis had never chosen investigations based on convenience. He followed evidence, nothing else. "The law doesn't care about personal comfort," Dennis continued. "It only cares about facts." Benjamin nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that." Over the next several weeks, Dennis immersed himself in the investigation. Thousands of vendor contracts, billing records, procurement approvals, electronic communication logs. Everything arrived through secure government channels. Dennis examined patterns instead of individuals, dates, transactions, approval sequences. Nothing immediately implicated Audrey. In fact, most documents suggested she had little involvement with procurement decisions. That brought him relief. Still, Meridian's name appeared repeatedly. The deeper investigators looked, the larger the network seemed to become. Late one evening, Audrey walked into Dennis's home office carrying 2 cups of coffee. She stopped. Stacks of printed documents covered the desk. Multiple encrypted monitors displayed complex data maps. She smiled. "I still don't understand what you actually do after maintenance jobs." Dennis looked up from the screen. "Mostly paperwork." She laughed. "That has to be the least exciting answer possible." "It's also the safest." She kissed his cheek. "Don't stay up too late." As she walked away, Dennis watched her disappear down the hallway. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to ask questions. He wanted to know whether she had noticed anything unusual inside Meridian. Instead, he turned back toward the encrypted files. The confidentiality agreement sitting beside his keyboard reminded him that silence was no longer simply a personal choice. It had become a legal obligation. And somewhere inside millions of digital records waiting to be examined, the truth was already hiding. The investigation consumed Dennis Carter's life, one carefully documented fact at a time. For nearly 6 months, he lived inside encrypted databases, financial records, and procurement contracts while trying to pretend everything at home remained normal. Most mornings began before sunrise. At 5:30, Dennis loaded tools into his aging Ford F-150 and spent the day repairing commercial HVAC systems, electrical panels, and industrial equipment across downtown Chicago. His customers saw nothing unusual. To them, he remained the dependable maintenance contractor who always arrived on time and never overcharged. Few noticed the rugged laptop permanently locked inside a steel case behind the driver's seat. Fewer still would have believed that the same man replacing air filters at noon would spend the evening helping federal investigators reconstruct millions of dollars in suspicious financial transactions. Dennis preferred it that way. The less attention he attracted, the easier it became to concentrate on facts instead of appearances. At Sentinel, however, the pace had become relentless. The company had expanded from a handful of specialists to nearly 40 analysts, forensic accountants, cybersecurity engineers, and legal documentation experts. Benjamin Hayes still handled every client presentation. Dennis still remained largely invisible. Inside the office, everyone respected him, but even many newer employees assumed he was simply the company's chief technical architect. Only Benjamin, the corporate attorneys, and the board knew who actually owned Sentinel. Dennis had insisted on keeping it that way. Recognition had never motivated him. Accuracy had. One Tuesday afternoon, Benjamin entered Dennis's office carrying another stack of sealed evidence containers. "You've been here 14 hours. Dennis glanced briefly at the wall clock. "I lost track." Benjamin set the containers on the conference table. "You've skipped lunch." "I wasn't hungry." Benjamin folded his arms. "You've also skipped dinner." Dennis smiled faintly. "I'll eat later." Benjamin sighed. "I've known federal agents with healthier habits. They usually retired early." Dennis finally leaned back from the computer. "You didn't come in here to discuss my eating schedule." "No," Benjamin admitted. "I came because the investigation just expanded." Dennis immediately became serious. Benjamin opened one of the evidence folders. Another subcontractor. Another shell company. Another series of suspicious payments. Dennis reviewed the documents carefully. Every payment followed almost identical patterns. Invoices approved unusually quickly. Vendor addresses connected to empty office buildings. Payments divided into smaller amounts just below internal review thresholds. Individually, they appeared ordinary. Together, they formed a remarkably consistent pattern. "They're layering transactions," Dennis said quietly. Benjamin nodded. "They've become sophisticated." Dennis highlighted several approval dates. "They're also coordinating departments." Benjamin leaned closer. "What do you see?" Dennis enlarged one spreadsheet. "The approvals move through multiple executives. No single person controls everything." Benjamin remained silent. Dennis continued. "That means whoever organized this understood internal compliance procedures. They designed the fraud to survive routine audits." Benjamin watched Dennis connect digital evidence across multiple screens, financial records, vendor databases, travel expenses, corporate emails. Nothing dramatic appeared on its own. But Dennis had spent years studying systems. He understood that complex failures almost never resulted from one broken component. The same principle applied to corruption. By midnight, another piece of the puzzle finally emerged. A cluster of outside consulting firms repeatedly received contracts despite providing little measurable work. Each company eventually transferred money through additional vendors before funds disappeared overseas. Benjamin stared at the transaction map. "That's nearly $40 million, Dennis corrected him. "Documented." Benjamin understood immediately. There could be much more. The room became quiet. Neither man celebrated discoveries. Real investigations were never exciting. Every confirmed fraud represented damaged businesses, ruined careers innocent employees, and public money diverted away from legitimate purposes. Dennis never forgot that. At home, however, life continued moving in the opposite direction. Audrey's career seemed unstoppable. Meridian Healthcare Technologies announced record quarterly earnings. Industry publications praised the company's rapid expansion. Business magazines featured interviews with senior leadership. Although Audrey wasn't yet the company's public face, executives increasingly included her in media appearances. She worked harder than ever. Late-night conference calls became routine. Weekend strategy meetings filled her calendar. Dinner together became increasingly rare. One Friday evening, she arrived home carrying 2 garment bags. Dennis looked up from repairing a kitchen cabinet hinge. "Shopping?" She smiled tiredly. "Corporate wardrobe." She removed an elegant navy business suit. "Promotion season." Dennis admired it. "It looks nice." "It was expensive." "You earned it." Audrey walked into the bedroom before answering. "I hope everyone else thinks so." Dennis paused. The wording stayed with him. Not, "I like it." Not, "I needed it." Everyone else. A few minutes later, she returned, holding another garment bag. "This one's for next month's executive retreat." Dennis nodded. "Looks beautiful." Audrey hesitated. "You aren't going to wear your old brown jacket again, are you?" Dennis looked down at himself. "I hadn't really thought about it." "It's getting worn." "I know." "You should buy something nicer." Dennis smiled. "I've still got plenty of life left in it." Audrey forced a small laugh. "I guess." The conversation ended there, but Dennis noticed something else. She no longer looked at his jacket the way she once had. Years earlier, she used to see the man wearing it. Now she seemed to notice only the jacket. The following weekend, they attended a networking dinner hosted by one of Meridian's regional partners. Nearly everyone around the table held executive titles: Chief Operating Officer, Senior Vice President, Managing Director, General Counsel. Eventually, someone asked Dennis what he did. "I maintain commercial facilities." The executive smiled politely. "Interesting." Another guest added, "Manual work is becoming harder to find these days." Dennis nodded. "It still needs doing." Before the conversation could continue, Audrey gently interrupted. "Dennis has always preferred practical work." She smiled towards the group. "I chased degrees. He chased toolboxes." Everyone laughed. Dennis smiled politely, but the conversation quickly shifted away from him. For the rest of the evening, people discussed venture capital acquisitions, Ivy League alumni events, and executive recruiting. Dennis listened quietly, not because he couldn't contribute, because he saw no reason to. Several topics involved government cybersecurity policy. Ironically, Dennis probably knew more than anyone at the table. He remained silent. Driving home, Audrey glanced sideways. "You were awfully quiet tonight." "I was listening." "You could have talked more." Dennis smiled. "They seemed to be enjoying themselves." "You don't like those events." "I like watching people." She laughed. "Still studying systems." "Always." Meanwhile, the investigation reached another critical milestone. Federal prosecutors approved expanded electronic search warrants. Additional servers were imaged. Thousands of internal emails entered evidence. Dennis supervised the forensic preservation personally. Every digital fingerprint mattered. Every metadata timestamp mattered. Every deleted file had to remain legally defensible. One evening, Benjamin entered the secure evidence room carrying coffee for both of them. "You've looked exhausted for weeks." Dennis accepted the cup. "Just busy." Benjamin studied him. "No." "You've looked conflicted." Dennis finally admitted the truth. "I keep hoping Meridian disappears from the evidence." Benjamin nodded slowly. It hasn't. No. Neither has Audrey. Dennis looked up immediately. What do you mean? Benjamin pointed toward several organizational charts. She still isn't connected. That's good. But she's getting promoted higher every month. Dennis understood. The higher Audrey climbed inside the company, the closer she moved toward decisions that investigators would eventually examine. Not because she had done anything wrong, because leadership always attracted scrutiny. Benjamin spoke carefully. If she's innocent, Dennis interrupted. She is, Benjamin continued anyway. If she's innocent, evidence will prove it. Dennis nodded. I know. But watching all this happen... He stopped speaking. Benjamin finished the sentence. Is harder than solving the investigation. Dennis looked toward the wall of evidence. I've spent my whole life fixing broken systems. Machines. Buildings. Networks. He smiled sadly. I never imagined the hardest system to repair would be my own marriage. Benjamin remained quiet. Some problems could not be solved with technical skill. Some required conversations, trust, timing. Unfortunately, confidentiality made every one of those impossible. As autumn approached, Meridian announced another celebration. Audrey had officially been promoted to executive vice president. The company reserved the grand ballroom at the Langham, Chicago. Board members would attend, major investors, regional executives, industry media. It would become the largest event of Audrey's professional career. That evening, Audrey handed Dennis the invitation. You'll come right. Dennis smiled warmly. Of course. You'll wear something nice. I'll do my best. She hesitated. And maybe... She looked almost embarrassed. Maybe don't tell people you left college unless they ask. Dennis looked at her quietly. I've never volunteered that information. I know. She searched unsuccessfully for the right words. I want everything to go perfectly. Dennis reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. It will. He meant every word. He truly wanted that night to become Audrey's happiest memory. Neither of them realized that within the same week, federal investigators would approve the operational plan that would eventually change both of their lives forever. And neither of them understood that the promotion party Audrey had dreamed about for years was about to become the night everyone would remember for an entirely different reason. The ballroom at the Langham, Chicago glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected thousands of tiny lights across polished marble floors. Everything about the evening projected success. White orchids decorated every table. A jazz quartet played softly near the entrance. Waiters moved effortlessly through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne and carefully prepared appetizers. Large video screens displayed Meridian Healthcare Technologies' newest achievements: revenue growth, national expansion, healthcare innovation awards, corporate excellence. Dennis Carter arrived 15 minutes early. Not because he worried about being late, because he believed important moments deserved respect. He stepped out of his aging Ford F-150 parked several blocks away instead of using valet service. The truck had served him faithfully for nearly 12 years. Its paint had faded slightly. A few scratches marked the driver's side door. The engine still ran perfectly. Dennis smiled as he locked it. Machines like people rewarded those who cared for them. He adjusted the sleeves of his dark navy suit. It wasn't designer. It wasn't custom-tailored, but it fit well. The leather shoes had been polished until they reflected the city lights. His only watch remained the same aging stainless steel model he had worn for nearly a decade. He entered the hotel carrying no briefcase, no symbols of wealth, only quiet confidence. Inside the lobby, several guests waited near the elevators. Most wore luxury watches, Italian suits, designer handbags. One younger executive glanced briefly toward Dennis before looking away. Another assumed Dennis worked for the hotel. "Excuse me." The executive held out an empty champagne glass. "Could you point me toward the bar?" Dennis smiled politely. "It's inside the ballroom on your left." The man nodded without another thought. He never realized Dennis was another guest. Dennis wasn't offended. People often saw what they expected to see, nothing more. When he entered the ballroom, Audrey immediately spotted him from across the room. She looked breathtaking. Her elegant emerald evening gown complemented the gold accents decorating the ballroom. Her hair had been styled into soft waves resting across one shoulder. Confident, professional, beautiful. Dennis smiled. For a brief moment, he forgot everything else. She walked toward him. "You made it. I told you I would." She kissed his cheek quickly. "You look nice." "So do you." She laughed softly. "I've been hearing that all evening." "You deserve it." Before she could answer, another executive approached. "Audrey." A tall man extended his hand. "Congratulations. This promotion was overdue." Audrey smiled warmly. "Thank you, Michael." She turned. "This is my husband, Dennis." Michael shook Dennis's hand. "Pleasure." "What line of work are you in?" Dennis answered calmly. "Commercial maintenance and facilities." Michael smiled politely. "Essential work." Then his attention immediately returned to Audrey. They began discussing regional expansion plans. Dennis quietly stepped aside. He had attended enough corporate functions to recognize the rhythm. Some conversations included him. Most did not. He wandered toward one of the large windows overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights shimmered across the water. For several peaceful minutes, he simply watched boats moving beneath the bridges. Benjamin Hayes arrived shortly afterward. Unlike most guests, Benjamin ignored nearly everyone else in the room. He walked directly toward Dennis. "There you are." Dennis smiled. "I thought you were flying back tomorrow." "My meeting ended early." Benjamin glanced around carefully. "I didn't want to miss Audrey's big night." Dennis appreciated that. Benjamin had become one of the few people who understood both sides of his life. Publicly, Benjamin greeted him warmly but professionally. Nothing more. Maintaining Dennis's privacy had become second nature. Several executives recognized Benjamin immediately. Conversations stopped. A few people whispered. "The Benjamin Hayes. I heard his company works federal investigations." Sentinel's CEO. Benjamin shook hands with several investors before returning to Dennis. "Are you doing all right?" Dennis nodded. "Just observing." Benjamin smiled knowingly. "Your favorite hobby?" The ballroom slowly filled. Board members arrived. Regional vice presidents, healthcare executives, investment partners, industry journalists. Television cameras recorded short interviews near the stage. Dennis noticed something else. Several people recognized Benjamin. None recognized him. He preferred it that way. The evening officially began with dinner. Audrey sat beside Meridian's chief executive officer. Dennis sat several seats farther down the table among spouses and invited guests. He didn't mind. Throughout dinner, he listened quietly while executives discussed acquisitions, market forecasts, and healthcare policy. Occasionally, someone asked Dennis a polite question. Mostly, they forgot he was there. After dessert, the CEO stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the room became silent. "Tonight we celebrate one of the finest leaders our company has ever developed." Applause filled the ballroom. The CEO continued describing Audrey's accomplishments: Harvard MBA, strategic leadership, innovation, integrity, dedication. Every compliment was deserved. Dennis applauded proudly. No one clapped harder than he did. Finally, Audrey walked onto the stage. The audience stood. Cameras flashed continuously. She accepted the Crystal Award with genuine emotion. "Thank you." Her voice trembled slightly. "This honor belongs to every mentor, colleague, and friend who believed in me." More applause followed. She thanked professors, co-workers, executives, the board, her leadership team. Finally, she smiled toward Dennis. "And my husband." Dennis looked up. For a second, he expected something deeply personal. Instead, Audrey laughed lightly. "He's probably the only college dropout who's survived living with a room full of Harvard graduates." The audience laughed. Dennis smiled politely. The joke could still have ended there. But it didn't. Audrey continued. "Whenever people ask how someone with so many degrees married someone without one," more laughter, "I tell them love has absolutely nothing to do with resumes." Another wave of laughter spread across the ballroom. Dennis remained still. His smile faded only slightly. Benjamin stopped clapping. The CEO looked uncomfortable. Audrey continued smiling, encouraged by the audience's reaction. "You should see him at networking events. He'd rather fix an air conditioner than read a business book." Several executives laughed louder than before. Someone near the front joked, "At least your HVAC bills stay low." The room erupted again. Dennis lowered his eyes briefly. He wasn't embarrassed because people laughed. He understood public speaking. Sometimes audiences laughed at harmless jokes. What hurt was something far simpler. Audrey knew the truth. She knew he had sacrificed his education so she could finish hers. She knew he spent every evening studying long after exhausting workdays. She knew he had built something meaningful with Benjamin. Yet at the most important moment of her career, she had reduced him to a punchline. Benjamin quietly placed his champagne glass on a nearby table. His expression hardened. Across the ballroom, several Sentinel employees attending as invited guests exchanged confused looks. None of them spoke. Confidentiality still mattered. Dennis simply continued listening. Audrey finished her speech. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Music resumed. People stood. Conversations restarted immediately. Within moments, executives surrounded Audrey, offering congratulations. Dennis waited patiently. He had no intention of interrupting. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Eventually, Audrey finally reached him. "So," she smiled brightly. "What did you think?" Dennis looked into her eyes. "You gave a very good speech." She laughed. "That's all. You worked hard. I'm proud of you." She studied him. "You didn't think the jokes were funny?" Dennis answered honestly. "The audience did." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Oh, Dennis. You take everything too seriously." Before he could respond, another executive approached, carrying 2 investors. "Audrey, we'd love you to meet our partners." She immediately turned toward them. "Of course." Then, almost as an afterthought, she looked back at Dennis. "Excuse us." He nodded. "I'll be here." She disappeared into another conversation without noticing the silence she left behind. Benjamin walked over a minute later. "You all right?" Dennis looked toward the crowded ballroom. "She's happy." Benjamin didn't answer. "That's not what I asked." Dennis exhaled slowly. "I've spent years making peace with how strangers see me." He smiled sadly. "I just never imagined she'd start seeing me the same way." Benjamin followed Dennis's gaze across the ballroom. Executives laughed around Audrey. Photographers captured celebration after celebration. No one noticed the quiet man standing alone beside the window. Benjamin finally spoke. "You don't have to stay." Dennis looked around once more. The applause had ended. The music continued. The celebration carried on without him. He reached into his pocket, removed the hotel parking validation Audrey had given him earlier, and quietly placed it on the nearest table. Then he picked up his coat. "I think," he said softly, "I've stayed long enough." Without saying goodbye to anyone else, Dennis walked calmly toward the ballroom exit. No scene, no argument, no anger, only silence. Behind him, the celebration continued exactly as before. No one realized that the man walking out the hotel doors owned a company whose investigation was already moving steadily toward the very organization everyone inside the ballroom had gathered to celebrate. And no one, not even Audrey, understood that this quiet departure marked the final moment their lives would ever feel normal. Dennis drove through downtown Chicago without turning on the radio. The silence inside the truck felt more honest than music. Traffic lights reflected across the windshield as he crossed the Chicago River, passing office buildings whose windows still glowed late into the evening. Inside those towers, thousands of people were probably finishing presentations, answering emails, or chasing promotions. Only a few understood how quickly appearances could become more important than character. Dennis replayed Audrey's speech in his mind. Not every word, only one sentence. The only college dropout who's survived living with a room full of Harvard graduates. The audience had laughed. She had laughed. Even he had smiled. Years of discipline had taught him never to react emotionally in public. Real strength, Benjamin often said, was measured by what a person chose not to do. Dennis believed that. Yet the words still lingered. Not because they were false. He had left college. That fact had never embarrassed him. What hurt was that the woman who knew the reason behind that decision had reduced it to entertainment. He reached home shortly after 10. The townhouse felt unusually quiet. Audrey would remain at the hotel for several more hours, celebrating with executives. Dennis removed his jacket carefully and hung it inside the hallway closet. He loosened his tie, walked into the kitchen, made himself a cup of black coffee despite the late hour. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon. His secure work phone vibrated across the countertop. "Benjamin," Dennis answered immediately. "You made it home." "Just did." Benjamin hesitated. "I wanted to check on you." "I'm all right." "You don't sound all right." Dennis looked through the kitchen window into the dark backyard. "I'm disappointed." Benjamin sighed. "I almost walked onto that stage." Dennis smiled faintly. "I know. I had to remind myself why I couldn't." Benjamin's voice carried genuine frustration. There were federal officials in that ballroom. There were executives who know Sentinel. "If anyone had recognized you," Dennis finished the sentence, "everything would have become about me." "Exactly." Benjamin remained quiet for a moment. "She has no idea what she's done." Dennis answered softly. "No, she doesn't." After ending the call, Dennis carried his coffee into the small home office. The room looked ordinary. Bookshelves, blueprints from maintenance projects, several engineering textbooks. Nothing unusual, unless someone unlocked the reinforced cabinet built discreetly into one wall. Behind it sat encrypted drives, secure communication equipment, and investigation materials protected under federal confidentiality agreements. Dennis unlocked the cabinet. His laptop booted into Sentinel's secure operating environment. Within seconds, encrypted messages began downloading. One notification immediately caught his attention, priority level high. From Benjamin Hayes, subject operational briefing approved. Dennis opened the document. Federal prosecutors had completed another legal review. The investigation had reached its operational phase. Coordinated interviews, financial seizures, search warrant execution, electronic evidence preservation. Every department now worked according to detailed timelines. Dennis carefully read every page. Meridian Healthcare Technologies appeared repeatedly. Procurement Division, Vendor Relations, Financial Oversight, Information Technology, Executive Administration. Each section contained names, schedules, evidence summaries. Again, he searched for Audrey. Again, he found nothing connecting her to criminal activity. Relief washed across him. She remained outside every investigative target list. But another realization slowly replaced that relief. She would inevitably witness everything. The company she had devoted her career to would soon face enormous public scrutiny. No amount of preparation could shield her from that. Dennis closed the files. For several minutes, he simply sat in silence. He wished perhaps for the first time in his career that someone else had been assigned the case. Not because he feared the work, because he understood exactly what the truth would cost. The next morning began like every other Saturday. Dennis woke before sunrise, made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, changed the oil in his truck. Routine had always helped organize complicated thoughts. At nearly 11 o'clock, Audrey finally returned home. She looked exhausted but exhilarated. The Crystal Promotion Award rested carefully inside its presentation case. She placed it proudly on the dining room table. "We stayed until almost 2. Dennis smiled. "I figured." She kissed him briefly. "You left early." "I didn't want to interrupt." "You could have said goodbye. I thought you were busy." "I was," she laughed. "It turned into 3 different after-parties." Dennis nodded. "I'm glad you had fun?" She studied him for several seconds. "You're still thinking about my speech?" Dennis answered honestly. "A little?" She sighed dramatically. "Dennis, it was a joke." "I know." Everyone laughed. "I noticed." "You know I wasn't trying to hurt you. I believe you." She walked closer. "So why are we still talking about it?" Dennis searched carefully for the right words. "Because people usually joke about things they believe." Her smile faded slightly. "I don't believe you're less intelligent." "I never said you did." She crossed her arms. "I wanted everyone to relax." Dennis nodded. "And making me the joke helped." She frowned. "You're twisting this." "No. I'm explaining how it felt." For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Audrey looked away. "I've got emails to answer." She carried her laptop upstairs. The conversation ended without resolution. Dennis remained at the dining table looking at the Crystal Award. He truly was proud of her. That had never changed. The distance growing between them hurt precisely because he still loved her. If he had stopped caring, the evening would have meant nothing. Monday morning brought another surprise. Sentinel's executive conference room filled with senior investigators before 8 o'clock. Benjamin entered carrying several folders. "We've received judicial authorization." Everyone immediately became attentive. Benjamin continued. "Beginning next week, multiple agencies will execute coordinated operations." A large digital map appeared on the conference screen. Chicago, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, St. Louis. Several connected investigations would unfold simultaneously. No suspect could warn another. No evidence could disappear. Timing mattered. Dennis reviewed his assignments. His responsibility centered on digital evidence preservation inside Meridian Healthcare Technologies. Not public interviews, not arrests, only technology. Benjamin addressed the room. "Remember, we are investigators, not prosecutors. We don't determine guilt. We document facts." Every employee nodded. Those words had become Sentinel's guiding principle. Facts first, opinions later. Following the meeting, Benjamin stopped Dennis before he returned to his office. "Walk with me?" They entered the rooftop terrace overlooking the city skyline. Benjamin folded his hands. "I need to ask you something." Dennis waited. "If this becomes too personal," Benjamin continued carefully, "I'll remove you." Dennis answered immediately. "No. You haven't even heard the question. I already know it." Benjamin looked surprised. "You want to know whether I can stay objective?" Benjamin smiled slightly. "Can you?" Dennis looked across the rooftops toward Lake Michigan. "When I repair an electrical system, I don't blame the wires. I trace the fault. When I investigate fraud, I don't chase people. I follow evidence." Benjamin nodded. "And Audrey," Dennis answered without hesitation. "If evidence ever points toward her, His voice grew quieter. "I'll document it." Benjamin watched him closely. "And if it doesn't? I'll document that too." For the first time that morning, Benjamin smiled with genuine confidence. "That's exactly why you're leading this." Later that afternoon, Dennis received another secure message. The subject line contained only 4 words: Media Exposure Assessment. Inside was a detailed briefing predicting likely public reactions once federal actions became visible. News coverage, financial markets, corporate reputation, executive interviews, social media speculation. One paragraph stood out. Senior executives not involved in wrongdoing may experience significant reputational consequences despite no evidence of misconduct. Dennis read the sentence twice. Audrey's face immediately came to mind. She had spent years building a respected professional reputation. Within days, strangers might question everything she had accomplished simply because of where she worked. He leaned back in his chair. There was still nothing he could say. Nothing he could warn her about. Nothing he could legally explain. All he could do was continue his work with complete integrity and hope the evidence protected innocent people as thoroughly as it exposed guilty ones. Outside his office window downtown, Chicago continued its ordinary rhythm. Commuters hurried home. Construction crews packed away equipment. Office lights slowly disappeared one floor at a time. The city had no idea that beneath its ordinary routine, a federal operation had quietly entered its final countdown. And with every passing hour, the distance between Dennis and Audrey grew wider, even as fate pushed them toward the same unavoidable collision. Tuesday arrived with unusually clear skies over Chicago. From the windows of Sentinel Integrity Solutions, the city looked calm, organized, almost peaceful. Dennis Carter knew appearances could be dangerously misleading. Inside the Secure Operations Center, analysts moved quietly between rows of monitors displaying encrypted databases, digital evidence logs, and federal case files. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. Every member of the team understood that the most important phase of the investigation had begun. At exactly 8 o'clock, Benjamin Hayes entered the conference room carrying a sealed envelope marked with a federal authorization seal. Everyone immediately stopped talking. Benjamin placed the envelope on the table. "This arrived 30 minutes ago." Dennis opened it carefully. Inside were the final judicial approvals, search warrants, digital seizure authorizations, financial preservation orders. Everything had now received official authorization. Benjamin looked around the room. "This operation officially begins Thursday morning at 6. Silence filled the conference room. Months of investigation had led to this moment. Every analyst understood that one mistake could compromise years of work. Benjamin continued. "Review your assignments one final time. No assumptions. No shortcuts. No personal opinions. We follow evidence exactly as documented." Everyone nodded. Dennis quietly reviewed his own responsibilities. He would supervise the forensic imaging of Meridian's executive servers. Every email, every financial record, every deleted file, every access log. Nothing could be overlooked. Nothing could be altered. Everything had to withstand federal court scrutiny. After the meeting ended, Benjamin closed the conference room door behind Dennis. "I've got something you should see." He handed Dennis a thin folder. "What is it?" "A supplemental evidence review." Dennis opened the folder. Inside were several newly recovered internal emails. None of them mentioned Audrey directly. Instead, they discussed executive approval chains for several questionable vendor contracts. Dennis noticed something unusual. One executive repeatedly bypassed Audrey's department before approving payments. He studied the dates. The pattern repeated itself again and again. Benjamin watched him carefully. "What do you see?" Dennis pointed toward one approval sequence. "She was intentionally excluded." Benjamin nodded. "That's our conclusion, too." Dennis looked up. Someone didn't want her involved. Exactly. Benjamin leaned against the table. We've interviewed 2 confidential witnesses. They both described Audrey the same way. Dennis remained silent. Too honest. Dennis almost smiled. That sounds like her. Benjamin continued. One witness said executives stopped inviting her to certain meetings because she asked too many compliance questions. Dennis looked back at the documents. Every missing approval suddenly made sense. Audrey hadn't been participating. She had been isolated. Whoever orchestrated the fraud had deliberately kept ethical executives away from sensitive financial decisions. Benjamin folded his arms. That's very good news. Dennis nodded slowly. It also means she's going to be blindsided. I'm afraid so. For the first time in weeks, Dennis felt genuine relief. His instincts had been correct. Audrey wasn't corrupt. She had simply been climbing a corporate ladder without realizing some of the steps beneath her were rotten. Unfortunately, innocence would not protect her from public embarrassment. By noon, Dennis returned to his maintenance schedule. His first appointment involved repairing an industrial cooling system inside a manufacturing facility on the city's west side. His customer greeted him warmly. Morning, Dennis. Morning. The compressor finally gave up. Dennis knelt beside the damaged equipment. Within minutes, he identified the problem. A cracked pressure valve. Simple. Replace the valve. Test the system. Verify normal operation. While working, he found himself comparing machines to organizations once again. Mechanical failures rarely happened overnight. Small neglected problems accumulated quietly. Eventually, the entire system stopped working. Companies often failed the same way. One ignored warning, then another, until collapse became inevitable. The factory manager watched Dennis finish the repair. I don't know how you always find the problem so quickly. Dennis smiled. I don't look where people are pointing. I look where the system stopped making sense. The manager laughed. I wish accountants worked that way. Dennis quietly returned to his truck. If only the man knew. Later that afternoon, Audrey called. Dennis answered immediately. Hi. Are you busy? Just finishing work. I wanted to apologize. Dennis remained quiet. For Saturday. I've been thinking about what you said. He listened. I really didn't understand how much it hurt you. Dennis appreciated hearing that. I'm not angry. I know. That almost makes it worse. He smiled softly. You've always been good at reading people. Except lately. Her voice sounded genuinely tired. Dennis, I've been so focused on work. I think I've forgotten how to slow down. He looked through the windshield at the Chicago skyline. We've both been busy. I'd like us to have dinner tomorrow. Just us. No phones. No emails. Dennis hesitated. Thursday morning's federal operation required extensive preparation Wednesday evening, but dinner came first. I'd like that. She sounded relieved. Good. I'll make reservations. After ending the call, Dennis closed his eyes briefly. For the first time in weeks, he believed they might finally have an honest conversation. He wished desperately that he could tell her everything. Why he had seemed distant. Why confidential phone calls interrupted evenings. Why Benjamin appeared unexpectedly in their lives. Why federal investigators occasionally contacted him. Instead, he carried the burden alone. Back at Sentinel, another discovery emerged before sunset. One forensic accountant rushed into Dennis's office carrying several printed reports. You need to see this. Dennis reviewed the documents. The accountant highlighted several international wire transfers. They weren't just stealing money. Dennis continued reading. They were laundering it. The accountant nodded. Through medical equipment contracts. Dennis enlarged the financial diagrams. Millions of dollars flowed through consulting firms before disappearing into offshore accounts. Then he noticed another detail, Several transactions had occurred only days before Audrey's promotion announcement. Someone had accelerated payments. Benjamin entered moments later. "I've already seen it." Dennis looked toward him. "They're cleaning house," Benjamin agreed. "They know internal audits are getting closer." "Maybe." Dennis shook his head. "No. They're nervous." Benjamin frowned. "What makes you think that?" Dennis pointed at the dates. "When criminals become confident, they get careless. When they become afraid, they move money. This isn't expansion. It's preparation." Benjamin immediately understood. They're expecting exposure. Exactly. Within an hour, federal prosecutors updated operational priorities. Several financial institutions would now receive preservation orders simultaneously with the search warrants. No funds could disappear. No accounts could be emptied. The timeline became even tighter. Wednesday evening finally arrived. Dennis returned home earlier than usual. Audrey had already changed into casual clothes. No business suit, no laptop open, no conference calls. Just the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. She smiled as he entered. "I almost forgot what you looked like before 8 o'clock. He laughed. "I could say the same thing." Dinner felt surprisingly normal. They talked about old friends from college, favorite restaurants, vacation plans they had postponed for years. For nearly 2 hours, neither of them mentioned promotions, investigations, or work. It reminded Dennis why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. As they walked back toward their car beside the Chicago River, Audrey slipped her hand into his. "I've missed this." "So have I." She stopped walking. "Dennis? I need to ask you something." He turned toward her. "Are you happy?" The question caught him completely off guard. He answered honestly. "With my life? With us?" Dennis looked into her eyes. "I want us to be better." She nodded slowly. "So do I." She leaned against him. "I promise things will slow down after this quarter." Dennis wished he could believe that. Instead, he simply wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Above them, city lights reflected across the dark water. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful again. Neither of them noticed the secure government vehicle parked half a block away. Inside, 2 federal agents reviewed tomorrow morning's operational checklist. Meridian Healthcare Technologies remained highlighted in red. Execution time, 6:00 a.m. Less than 12 hours remained before one of the largest corporate fraud investigations in Chicago would finally become public. And as Dennis held Audrey beside the river, he realized this quiet evening together might be the last completely ordinary moment they would ever share. Thursday morning began long before sunrise. At 4:15 a.m., Dennis Carter parked his truck inside the secured underground garage beneath Sentinel Integrity Solutions. The city above still slept beneath a blanket of darkness, but inside the operations center, every light was already on. Rows of analysts quietly reviewed final checklists. Federal agents from multiple agencies gathered around digital maps. Every laptop displayed synchronized countdown clocks. 1 hour and 45 minutes remained. Benjamin Hayes stood at the front of the operations room. No dramatic speeches, no unnecessary motivation, only facts. Final equipment verification. Encrypted storage. Confirmed. Forensic imaging stations. Confirmed. Chain of custody documentation. Confirmed. Federal coordination. Confirmed. Benjamin looked around the room. Good. He paused before speaking again. Remember why we're here. We're not destroying companies. We're protecting the truth. We're protecting patients. We're protecting honest employees. Dennis nodded silently. Those words mattered. Thousands of innocent people worked for Meridian Healthcare Technologies. Doctors, researchers, engineers, administrative staff. Most had absolutely nothing to do with the crimes being investigated. Their work deserved protection. At precisely 5:30 a.m., secure communication channels opened. Large digital screens displayed locations across Chicago. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Justice, Financial Crimes Task Force, Digital Evidence Response Teams. Every location turned green. Ready. Benjamin looked toward Dennis. "You ready?" Dennis answered calmly. "I've been ready for months." At exactly 5:59 a.m., complete silence settled over the operations center. Even keyboards stopped clicking. Everyone watched the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 06, 0000. Benjamin pressed a single confirmation key. Execute. Immediately, dozens of encrypted messages were transmitted simultaneously. Federal vehicles began moving. Search warrants were served. Evidence preservation orders activated. Digital access restrictions took effect. Across Chicago, a carefully coordinated operation quietly came alive. 20 minutes later, Dennis arrived outside Meridian Healthcare Technologies headquarters. The modern glass tower looked exactly as it had every other morning. Employees walked toward the entrance carrying coffee. Security guards greeted familiar faces. Nobody realized history was about to change. 3 unmarked government SUVs rolled to the curb. Federal agents stepped out wearing business attire rather than tactical gear. Professional, calm, organized. No flashing lights, no dramatic displays. The lead agent approached reception. "I'm Special Agent Rebecca Collins. We're here to execute a federal search warrant." She presented official documents. The receptionist froze. I'm calling executive management." "Please do." Within minutes, building security secured server rooms while investigators documented every action. Dennis entered with the digital evidence team. Every movement followed strict legal procedure. Every computer photographed before touching it. Every hard drive documented. Every network connection recorded. Nothing happened by accident. Meanwhile, 20 floors above, Audrey Carter stepped out of the elevator carrying her morning coffee. She immediately sensed something unusual. Employees stood whispering near conference rooms. Security personnel blocked several hallways. A legal assistant hurried past without making eye contact. Audrey stopped one of her managers. "What's happening?" I don't know." "They're saying federal investigators are downstairs." Before Audrey could ask another question, every employee's company phone vibrated simultaneously. "Emergency executive meeting. Conference room A. Immediate attendance required." Audrey walked quickly toward the executive floor. Inside the conference room, confusion filled the air. Senior executives whispered nervously. Legal counsel spoke quietly into mobile phones. The chief executive officer entered, looking pale. He closed the doors. "I've just spoken with federal authorities." Silence. "They're executing multiple search warrants." Someone immediately asked, "Why?" The CEO shook his head. "They haven't discussed the investigation. Our attorneys are reviewing the documents now." Another executive asked, "Is this about cybersecurity?" "No." "Financial reporting?" "We don't know." Audrey listened carefully. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. She remembered months of compliance questions that had never received satisfactory answers. Vendor approvals delayed without explanation. Meetings she had unexpectedly been excluded from. At the time, she had assumed politics. Now she wasn't so certain. Back downstairs, Dennis carefully supervised the imaging of Meridian's executive email servers. A nervous IT director watched the process. "How long will this take?" Dennis answered professionally. "As long as necessary. We're preserving evidence. We're not altering your systems." The director looked relieved. "You've done this before." Dennis gave a small smile. "A few times." No one inside the building recognized him. To everyone else, he was simply another forensic specialist wearing a federal contractor identification badge. Nearly 2 hours passed before the first major discovery emerged. One analyst approached Dennis carrying preliminary server logs. "We found encrypted archives." Dennis examined the timestamps. Files had been deleted only 36 hours earlier. He nodded. "We'll recover everything." "We already are." Minutes later, another analyst spoke. "Recovered." Dennis opened the restored folders. Thousands of internal emails appeared. Financial spreadsheets, contract approvals, hidden accounting records, everything investigators had suspected. Only now they possessed direct evidence. Benjamin contacted him through encrypted audio. "Status. We've got the archives. Integrity confirmed. So far." "Excellent." Benjamin's voice remained calm. "Continue?" At 9:15 a.m., national financial news networks interrupted regular programming. Breaking news: federal investigation underway at Meridian Healthcare Technologies. Chicago business reporters gathered outside corporate headquarters. Television cameras lined the sidewalks. Helicopters circled overhead. Employees inside the building stared at news alerts appearing across every phone. Panic slowly replaced confusion. Audrey opened one article, another, then another. No details, only speculation. Possible procurement fraud, federal financial investigation, electronic evidence collection. Her stomach tightened. She immediately called Dennis. No answer. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. She left a message. "Dennis, something terrible is happening. The company's under federal investigation. I don't know what's going on. Please call me." She lowered the phone. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely afraid. Across the building, several executives attempted quietly leaving through private exits. Federal agents politely stopped them. "Sir, we need you to remain available. This isn't an arrest. But you cannot leave at this time." Faces turned pale. Meanwhile, Dennis continued reviewing evidence. One recovered email immediately caught his attention. The sender, the recipient, the subject line. Everything matched information provided months earlier by confidential witnesses. He read silently, then read it again. The message explicitly instructed subordinates to bypass standard executive approval procedures. Several forged signatures appeared within attached documents. None belonged to Audrey. Exactly as Benjamin had predicted. She had been excluded deliberately. Dennis documented every finding carefully. No emotion, only facts. Every recovered document entered secure evidence storage, every timestamp verified, every digital signature authenticated. At noon, Benjamin arrived inside Meridian headquarters. He walked directly toward Dennis. "Anything involving Audrey?" Dennis handed him the latest summary. Benjamin reviewed it quietly. Finally, he looked up. "She's clean." Dennis released a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Benjamin placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I told you." Dennis nodded. "I needed proof." "You have it." Across the executive floor, federal investigators began interviewing department leaders individually. Audrey waited outside a conference room. Her hands trembled slightly despite every effort to remain composed. She replayed months of decisions inside her head. Every meeting, every approval, every conversation. Had she missed something obvious? A federal investigator opened the conference room door. "Miss Carter?" She stood. "Yes." "If you'll come with me." She entered, expecting accusations. Instead, the investigator smiled politely. "Relax. You're not the subject of our investigation." Audrey blinked. "I'm not, no. We simply need your assistance understanding several internal approval processes." Relief washed across her face, yet confusion remained. If she wasn't under investigation, I thought. Who was outside the conference room? Dennis watched quietly through the glass wall from the opposite hallway. She looked exhausted, confused, completely unaware that the man she had called a college dropout only days earlier had just spent months helping ensure the evidence proved her innocence. He turned away before she could notice him. The investigation was only beginning. Soon, the arrests would follow. Soon, hidden names would become public. And when those names finally appeared, Audrey would discover that the quiet husband she believed repaired broken machines had in reality been the one helping expose an entire network of corruption hidden inside the company she had devoted her career to building. The first arrest occurred at 1:17 p.m. News cameras waiting outside Meridian Healthcare Technologies immediately turned toward the main entrance as federal agents escorted Chief Financial Officer Richard Nolan from the building. His hands were not handcuffed. Not yet. He walked between two agents carrying a leather briefcase that had already been sealed as evidence. Reporters rushed forward. "Mr. Nolan, do you have a statement?" Were company earnings manipulated? Did executives approve fraudulent contracts? The agents ignored every question. Within seconds, every major business network carried the images live. Inside Meridian headquarters, employees gathered around television screens in stunned silence. Some covered their mouths. Others simply stared. No one had expected one of the company's highest-ranking executives to leave surrounded by federal investigators. Audrey watched the broadcast from the executive conference room. Richard Nolan had been one of the people who encouraged her promotion. He had congratulated her only 5 days earlier. He had toasted her success. Now he was being escorted into a government vehicle. Nothing made sense. Another executive whispered, "This can't be happening." No one answered. Across the building, investigators continued examining records without interruption. Dennis remained focused on the digital evidence laboratory established inside Meridian's secure server room. One recovered database connected shell companies across 5 different states. Another contained altered payment approvals. Each discovery strengthened the government's case. Benjamin entered, carrying a tablet. "We've confirmed 27 fraudulent contracts." Dennis reviewed the numbers. Total value? Just over $400 million. Dennis looked back at the financial records. "And that's only what we've documented." Benjamin nodded. "There may be more." Before either man could continue, Agent Rebecca Collins approached. "We've received authorization for Phase 2. Benjamin understood immediately. "Executive devices," she nodded. "Phones. Laptops. Tablets. Everything. Within minutes, investigators respectfully requested company-issued devices from senior leadership. Most complied immediately. One executive hesitated. Dennis recognized the name from recovered emails. Martin Ellsworth, Chief Procurement Officer. Ellsworth forced a smile. "My attorney advised me not to surrender anything without additional documentation." Agent Collins calmly handed him another warrant. "You've already received it." His face lost color. He slowly placed his phone on the table. Dennis carefully accepted the device. Every action was photographed, every serial number documented, every transfer signed. No mistakes, no shortcuts. Meanwhile, Audrey remained seated beside Human Resources Vice President Linda Foster. Linda leaned closer. "Do you know what's going on?" Audrey shook her head. "I honestly don't." Linda sighed. "I've worked here 19 years. I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Audrey. She thought about Dennis. He still hadn't returned her morning call. Normally, he always answered. Unless he was working somewhere with poor reception. She smiled sadly at the thought. He was probably repairing another broken industrial cooling system somewhere across Chicago. The irony almost made her laugh. Machines seemed easier to fix than people. At 2:45 p.m., another breakthrough emerged. Digital forensic analysts successfully unlocked encrypted communications hidden inside Martin Ellsworth's company phone. Thousands of deleted messages appeared. Dennis began reviewing them. Most discussed payments, invoices, offshore accounts. Then one message caught his attention. It had been sent only 3 weeks earlier. Ellsworth wrote, "Keep Carter out of every approval meeting." Dennis froze. Carter. He continued reading. "She asks too many compliance questions. Route everything through Nolan." Benjamin walked beside him. "What is it?" Dennis silently handed over the screen. Benjamin read the conversation. A slow smile appeared. "This confirms everything." Dennis nodded. "They intentionally isolated her." Benjamin looked toward the executive offices. "Which means when this reaches court, they'll know she tried to follow procedure." Dennis finally allowed himself a small breath of relief. For months he had feared hidden evidence might unexpectedly implicate Audrey. Instead, every new discovery strengthened her position. She hadn't participated. She had unknowingly become an obstacle, and obstacles had been quietly removed. By late afternoon, federal prosecutors approved the first public criminal complaint. The charges included conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, false financial reporting, obstruction of justice. Additional indictments would follow. Television commentators speculated non-stop. Stock analysts debated Meridian's future. Social media exploded with rumors. Inside the company, fear spread faster than facts. Employees wondered whether they would lose their jobs. Researchers worried about ongoing medical projects. Administrative staff feared the company would collapse entirely. Dennis understood their anxiety. This investigation targeted criminals, not honest workers. Unfortunately, public opinion rarely made that distinction. At 4:30 p.m., Audrey was finally allowed to leave the conference room. The hallway looked completely different from that morning. Federal evidence boxes lined the walls. Investigators moved between offices carrying sealed containers. Several executives had already departed, accompanied by attorneys. She slowly walked toward her own office. Everything felt unfamiliar. She stopped in front of the framed certificate celebrating her recent promotion. Only days earlier, she had imagined this office representing the beginning of her greatest professional achievement. Now it felt like the center of a disaster. Her assistant entered quietly. "Miss Carter." "Yes." "There's someone asking for you." "Who?" "A federal investigator." Audrey nodded nervously. "Send them in." A woman in a Navy business suit entered carrying a folder. She smiled politely. "Miss Carter, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Collins." Audrey stood. "Am I under investigation?" Collins answered immediately. "No." Relief briefly crossed Audrey's face. "Then why am I here?" "We need your assistance." Collins opened the folder. "You repeatedly questioned several procurement procedures over the past 18 months. Audrey looked surprised. "You've seen those reports?" "We have." "I never received satisfactory answers." "We know. You requested internal compliance reviews." "Yes." "They were denied." Audrey slowly nodded. "They always told me someone else had already approved everything." Collins closed the folder. "Those approvals were fraudulent." Silence filled the office. Audrey struggled to process the words. "I tried. I really tried." Collins gave a reassuring smile. "We know. That's why you're a witness. Not a suspect." After the investigator left, Audrey remained standing beside her desk for several minutes. She suddenly remembered dozens of conversations. Meetings canceled without explanation. Emails redirected. Requests quietly ignored. Every strange decision finally fit together. Someone had been working very hard to keep her away from the truth. Across another floor, Dennis received final clearance to leave Meridian. The first operational phase had ended successfully. Benjamin walked beside him toward the parking garage. "You did good today." Dennis looked back toward the building. I wish it hadn't happened. Benjamin understood. But if it hadn't, the fraud would have continued. Dennis nodded. I know. Benjamin stopped walking. There's one more thing. What? The Attorney General wants to meet the Sentinel leadership team tomorrow. Dennis raised an eyebrow. Why? Benjamin smiled. They've finally learned who actually designed the forensic architecture that uncovered the case. Dennis immediately understood. His anonymity was ending. Not publicly, but within federal leadership the secret could no longer remain hidden. Benjamin placed a hand on his shoulder. You've spent years staying in the shadows. Dennis looked toward the evening skyline. Maybe. But Audrey still doesn't know. Benjamin remained silent for a moment. She will. When the timing is right. Dennis climbed into his truck and drove home through heavy evening traffic. Every radio station discussed Meridian. Every electronic billboard displayed breaking news headlines. Every conversation seemed connected to the investigation. Yet inside the truck there was only silence. He wondered what Audrey would say when she came home. He wondered whether she had begun questioning everything she thought she knew about her company. Most of all, he wondered how much longer he could protect the greatest secret of his own life. Because with each passing hour, the distance between the quiet maintenance contractor and the hidden founder of Sentinel Integrity Solutions was disappearing. And the moment of revelation was now closer than ever before. Dennis arrived home shortly after 7 that evening. The townhouse was unusually quiet. Normally, Audrey would still be answering emails or participating in conference calls, but tonight her laptop remained closed on the dining room table. She sat alone beside the living room window, still wearing the same navy business suit from that morning. Her promotion award rested on the bookshelf across the room. Only a week earlier, it had represented the proudest achievement of her career. Now she could barely look at it. She heard the front door open. Dennis. I'm home. He walked into the living room carrying nothing more than his worn leather tool bag. To Audrey, he looked exactly the same as always. Calm, steady, ordinary. She stood and embraced him tightly. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Dennis gently wrapped his arms around her. You've had a hard day. She nodded against his shoulder. I don't even know how to explain it. You don't have to. She stepped back. No. I need to. She sat on the sofa while Dennis quietly took the chair opposite her. I've spent years believing I understood my company. She laughed bitterly. I didn't understand anything. Dennis listened without interruption. There were federal agents everywhere. They searched executive offices. They took computers. They questioned people. Richard Nolan was escorted out of the building. She looked down at her hands. I trusted him. Dennis answered softly. I know. She frowned. So, how do you know? I saw the news. She nodded slowly. Right. The news. She leaned back. They told me I'm not under investigation. Dennis remained silent. They said someone intentionally kept me away from certain decisions. They showed me documents proving I had repeatedly questioned contracts. She looked confused. I honestly thought everyone ignored my concerns because I was inexperienced. Dennis shook his head gently. No. They ignored them because you were asking the right questions. Audrey stared at him. You really think so? I do. She smiled sadly. I wish I believed in myself the way you always have. Dennis had believed in her long before she believed in herself. Long before Harvard. Long before Meridian. Long before executive titles. He simply nodded. After a long silence, Audrey quietly asked, Can I ask you something? Of course. Have you ever been disappointed in me? Dennis considered the question carefully. He had always believed honesty required kindness as much as truth. Sometimes. She looked away. I thought so. But disappointment isn't the same as giving up. She slowly met his eyes again. I've never given up on you. Her eyes began to fill with tears. I don't deserve that. Dennis smiled gently. Maybe none of us deserve the people who believe in us. She covered her face briefly. I keep thinking about my promotion speech. Dennis remained quiet. I've replayed it all day. I sounded arrogant. I made fun of you. I thought everyone was laughing with us. She paused. They were laughing at you. Dennis answered carefully. I think most people simply followed the room. She shook her head. I should have known better. You did know better. His words surprised even himself. You just forgot. Forgot what? Who I was. Silence settled between them. For the first time since college, Audrey realized he wasn't talking about careers, or education, or money. He was talking about character. She remembered another night many years earlier. A tiny apartment, cheap pizza, engineering textbooks scattered across the table. Dennis studying after working a 12-hour shift. Back then, she had admired his determination more than any degree. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing that man. She whispered, I'm sorry. Dennis believed she meant it. I know. She wiped away a tear. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I already have. She looked stunned. What? I forgave you before you apologized. Why? Because I knew your heart before your success changed your habits. She lowered her eyes. I don't even recognize myself lately. Dennis quietly stood and walked toward the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to Audrey. She smiled weakly. Still black? You still add too much sugar. She laughed for the first time all day. I do. The familiar routine eased the tension. They sat together quietly. Finally, Audrey spoke again. The investigators mentioned someone outside the company helped uncover everything. Dennis remained composed. Oh, they wouldn't say who. They just kept referring to a federal forensic contractor. She sighed. Whoever they are, they probably saved the company from even greater damage. Dennis looked into his coffee. Maybe. I hope someone thanks them. He didn't answer. Across town, Benjamin Hayes sat inside Sentinel's executive conference room, reviewing tomorrow's agenda. Senior officials from the Department of Justice, representatives from multiple federal agencies, a formal recognition meeting. Benjamin looked toward the empty chair reserved for Dennis. His phone vibrated. Dennis, Benjamin answered. Everything all right? For now. How's Audrey? She knows she's innocent. Benjamin smiled. Good. But she still doesn't know about me. Benjamin leaned back. She can't stay in the dark forever. Dennis looked toward Audrey, who was quietly reading news reports across the room. I know. The Attorney General wants to publicly acknowledge Sentinel's leadership next week. I heard. They'll expect you there. Dennis closed his eyes briefly. I've avoided publicity for years. You avoided it because it protected investigations, Benjamin answered. This case is different. Dennis understood. The operation had entered public record. Much of the evidence would soon become part of federal court proceedings. His anonymity was becoming increasingly impractical. Benjamin continued. At some point, she's going to ask why I kept introducing myself as CEO. Dennis smiled faintly. You weren't lying. No, but I also wasn't telling the whole truth. After ending the call, Dennis walked back into the living room. Audrey looked up from her phone. The media's getting everything wrong. She sounded frustrated. They're acting like everyone at Meridian was corrupt. Dennis nodded. People often confuse organizations with individuals. It's unfair. It is, she sighed. I keep wishing someone would explain what really happened. Dennis looked at her thoughtfully. The truth usually arrives more slowly than rumors, she smiled. That sounds like something an investigator would say. He nearly laughed. Maybe. She stretched before standing. I'm exhausted. So am I. As Audrey headed upstairs, she paused halfway up the staircase. Dennis. Yes. When all this is over, I want us to start over too. He looked up at her. I'd like that. She smiled softly before disappearing into the bedroom. Dennis remained downstairs alone. His secure phone vibrated once more. A single encrypted message appeared. Witness notification approved. Subject Carter Audrey. Status cleared. Operational restrictions lifted following initial testimony. Dennis read the message twice. Then a second notification appeared. Leadership disclosure meeting. Attendance required. Monday, 9:00 a.m. For the first time since the investigation began, the legal restrictions preventing him from discussing his role were beginning to disappear. The secret he had protected for years was no longer shielded by necessity. Soon, it would become a choice. Dennis looked toward the staircase where Audrey had disappeared moments earlier. She had spent years believing she knew exactly who her husband was. Within days, she would discover that the quiet maintenance contractor she had underestimated had never stopped building something extraordinary. And when that truth finally emerged, it would force both of them to confront a far more difficult question than who had committed the fraud. They would have to decide whether trust once broken by pride and silence could ever truly be rebuilt. Monday morning arrived with unusually clear skies over downtown Chicago. Dennis woke before sunrise, as he always did. He quietly prepared coffee while the house remained silent. The secure phone resting inside his desk drawer vibrated once. He didn't need to read the message. He already knew today's schedule. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Department of Justice would formally recognize Sentinel Integrity Solutions for its role in dismantling one of the largest procurement fraud schemes in recent healthcare history. For the first time since founding the company, Dennis would attend an official meeting not as an anonymous technical consultant, but as the company's founder and majority owner. The decision had taken years to arrive. He had never wanted recognition. He had only wanted results. Upstairs, Audrey entered the kitchen wearing a simple gray sweater instead of one of her usual executive suits. She looked exhausted. The past 3 days had changed her. The confident executive who had carefully measured every conversation now seemed quieter, more thoughtful. She smiled gently. You're up early. Dennis poured another cup of coffee. So are you. She accepted the mug. I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. They stood together in comfortable silence before Audrey finally spoke. I've been placed on paid administrative leave. Dennis nodded slowly. I expected something like that. They said it's temporary. They need executives available for interviews while protecting the integrity of the investigation. Dennis answered calmly. That makes sense. She sighed. It still feels like punishment. No. It's procedure. She studied his face. You always stay so calm. He smiled. Not always. You hide it well. Perhaps he did. Years of federal investigations had taught him that panic never improved decisions. Audrey looked at the clock. What are you working on today? Dennis hesitated only briefly. I have a meeting downtown. Maintenance contract. Something like that. She smiled faintly. I hope it's an easy day. He wished it would be. Instead, it would become one of the most important days of his life. An hour later, Dennis entered the federal courthouse through a private security entrance. Benjamin Hayes waited inside the lobby. He wore a dark blue suit instead of his usual charcoal jacket. You clean up pretty well, Dennis laughed quietly. So do you. Benjamin handed him a visitor credential. No turning back now. Dennis looked at the badge. Founder. Sentinel Integrity Solutions. For years he had avoided seeing those words printed beneath his own name. Benjamin noticed his hesitation. Nervous? A little. You've testified before Congress. Behind closed doors. You've briefed cabinet officials. Without cameras. Benjamin smiled. Today there are no cameras either. That helped. The recognition ceremony wasn't public. Only senior federal officials, investigators, prosecutors, and selected leadership would attend. Inside the conference room, nearly 30 people stood as Benjamin and Dennis entered. Attorney General Helen Brooks approached first. She extended her hand. Mr. Carter, it's good to finally meet you. Dennis shook her hand. The honor is mine. She smiled warmly. I disagree. For 3 years, you've allowed someone else to accept public recognition, while you quietly built one of the most effective forensic investigation teams in the country. Dennis glanced toward Benjamin. He deserved the recognition. Benjamin immediately replied, We both know who deserved it. Laughter spread through the room. The atmosphere felt surprisingly relaxed. Soon, the formal meeting began. The Attorney General addressed everyone. This investigation succeeded because law enforcement and private expertise worked together. She looked toward Dennis. Mr. Carter designed the forensic architecture that allowed investigators to recover evidence defendants believed had been permanently destroyed. Several officials nodded. She continued. More importantly, his team insisted on protecting innocent employees while identifying those responsible. That distinction preserved an entire company. Dennis appreciated those words more than any award. That had always been his greatest concern. Justice without unnecessary destruction. After the presentation concluded, several federal executives approached Dennis individually. Some thanked him. Others discussed future partnerships. One deputy director smiled. I've heard stories about you for years. Dennis looked surprised. You have? We just didn't know your name. Benjamin laughed. I kept him hidden. For operational reasons. The deputy director nodded. And now? Benjamin answered before Dennis could. Now it's time. Across town, Audrey sat inside her home office reviewing hundreds of unread messages. Some came from co-workers expressing support. Others came from reporters requesting interviews. She ignored every one of them. Instead, she found herself opening an old digital photo album. University of Illinois. There they were. Dennis wearing faded jeans covered in engine grease after finishing work before class. She remembered teasing him because he always smelled faintly of machine oil. He had simply laughed. Another photograph. Harvard graduation. Dennis stood proudly in the audience. He looked happier than she did. Another picture. Their wedding. Neither of them had much money. Neither cared. She stared at the screen for a long time. When had titles become more important than character? She couldn't identify the exact moment. Only that somewhere along the way she had begun measuring success differently. Her phone rang. It was Linda Foster. Audrey? Hi. Have you seen the latest internal email? No. They're restructuring executive leadership. I expected that. Linda hesitated. They're also bringing in outside advisors. Audrey wasn't surprised. The board has no choice. They need public trust. After ending the call, Audrey walked into the living room. Dennis's old leather tool bag still rested beside the front door. She smiled sadly. She had complained about that bag countless times. She thought it looked unprofessional. Now she realized it represented years of honest work. She picked it up. It felt heavier than she expected. Inside were neatly organized tools, precision instruments, electrical testing equipment, a worn notebook. She opened it carefully. Instead of maintenance schedules, she found pages filled with handwritten observations. Leadership isn't measured by visibility. Integrity matters most when nobody is watching. Never embarrass another person to elevate yourself. Solve problems quietly. Leave every place better than you found it. She slowly sat down. Those weren't maintenance notes. They were life principles. Many pages contained dates going back nearly 15 years. Dennis had written them gradually, long before either of them achieved professional success. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered softly, "I forgot." She wasn't talking about the notebook. She was talking about the man who wrote it. Late that afternoon, Dennis returned home. The recognition plaque remained inside his briefcase. He had no intention of displaying it. As he entered the house, Audrey stood waiting in the hallway. She held the worn notebook gently in both hands. I'm sorry." Dennis looked at the notebook. "You read it?" "I shouldn't have." "No." "It's all right." She stepped closer. "I don't know when you wrote these. Over the years." She looked directly into his eyes. "I used to think success meant becoming someone important." Dennis listened quietly. "I think I understand now. It means becoming someone worthy." Dennis smiled softly. "I've always believed you were." She shook her head. "Not lately." He reached out and took the notebook from her hands before placing it back inside the tool bag. "People lose their way. What matters is whether they choose to come back." She looked at him with renewed determination. "I'm trying." "I know." Neither of them noticed the secure phone vibrating inside Dennis's jacket pocket. A new message had arrived. Press conference approved, Sentinel leadership disclosure, Wednesday. The secret could no longer remain hidden. Within 48 hours, Audrey would finally learn that the quiet husband she had introduced as a college dropout with a toolbox was in reality the founder of one of the nation's most respected forensic cybersecurity companies. And the truth would not come from Dennis. It would be revealed before the entire country. Wednesday morning began with a level of media attention Chicago had not seen in years. Satellite trucks lined the streets surrounding the James R. Thompson Center, where the Department of Justice had scheduled its official press conference. National news networks broadcast live from the sidewalk. Business reporters discussed Meridian Healthcare Technologies. Legal analysts debated the criminal charges. Financial commentators predicted the company's future. No one outside a very small circle knew the identity of the man who had quietly led the investigation from behind the scenes. Inside the building, Dennis adjusted the collar of his navy suit. Benjamin walked beside him. "You look uncomfortable." Dennis smiled. "I'd rather be fixing an air conditioning unit." Benjamin laughed. "I know. But today isn't about comfort. It's about truth." Dennis nodded. For years, he had hidden behind Benjamin's public leadership because it protected sensitive government operations. Now that the investigation had entered the prosecution phase, there was no operational reason to remain invisible. The Attorney General had made that very clear. Meanwhile, across the city, Audrey sat in her living room watching the live broadcast. She wasn't interested in the politics. She simply wanted answers. The television anchor spoke with measured excitement. Today, the Department of Justice is expected to recognize the private investigative team responsible for uncovering the massive procurement fraud scheme involving Meridian Healthcare Technologies. Another reporter added, "Government officials have described the lead architect of the investigation as one of the country's most respected experts in digital forensic reconstruction." Audrey leaned forward. She wondered who that person could possibly be. Whoever they were, they had changed the course of hundreds of lives. The camera switched inside the conference room. Rows of journalists filled every seat. Government officials stood behind the podium. Benjamin appeared near the front. Audrey recognized him immediately. She remembered seeing him once at a charity event years earlier. The television identified him as Chief Executive Officer of Sentinel Integrity Solutions. She nodded to herself. That made sense. He had probably directed everything. The Attorney General approached the microphone. Good morning. Today we announce significant progress in the criminal prosecution arising from the Meridian Healthcare Technologies investigation. She briefly summarized the evidence. The shell companies, the fraudulent contracts, the recovered financial records, the protection of innocent employees. She then paused. Investigations of this complexity require extraordinary cooperation. We are therefore recognizing the organization whose forensic expertise made this case possible. She turned slightly. Sentinel Integrity Solutions. Applause filled the room. Benjamin stepped forward first. He accepted a commemorative plaque. After thanking the investigative teams, he looked toward the audience. There is one misunderstanding I have allowed to continue for many years. The room became quiet. Benjamin smiled. People often assume I founded Sentinel. I did not. Every reporter immediately looked up from their notebooks. The individual responsible for creating Sentinel's investigative methodology. Designing its forensic architecture. And building this organization from the ground up has intentionally remained outside public attention. Benjamin stepped aside. It is my privilege to introduce Sentinel Integrity Solutions founder and majority owner, Dennis Carter. The room froze. Dozens of cameras turned simultaneously. Dennis calmly walked toward the podium. Audrey stared at the television. Her coffee cup slipped from her hands and shattered across the hardwood floor. She didn't even notice. She couldn't breathe. The television displayed her husband's face, not in work clothes, not carrying his old leather tool bag, standing beside the Attorney General of the United States. Every reporter immediately began asking questions. Dennis Carter. The Dennis Carter. When did you found Sentinel? How long have you been leading these investigations? The Attorney General raised a hand for silence. Dennis stood behind the podium with the same calm expression Audrey had seen every morning for years, except now the entire country was seeing it. He adjusted the microphone. Good morning. His voice remained steady. I appreciate the recognition. But this case has never been about me. It has always been about protecting honest people while holding dishonest ones accountable. Audrey felt tears forming. That sounded exactly like the notebook she had discovered. Exactly like the man she had fallen in love with. A reporter immediately asked, Mr. Carter, how long have you owned Sentinel Integrity Solutions? Dennis answered without hesitation. Almost 12 years. Another reporter. Why did you keep your ownership secret? Because investigations succeed when attention stays focused on evidence, not personalities. Another hand rose. Mr. Carter, reports indicate your company holds federal contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dennis nodded. Sentinel has been fortunate to earn the government's trust. The reporter continued. Were you personally involved in the Meridian investigation? Yes. I supervised the forensic strategy. Audrey covered her mouth. Every conversation, every late night, every unexplained meeting, every secure phone call, every time he quietly said he had paperwork. He had never lied. He simply hadn't been allowed to tell her the truth. Another journalist spoke. Did anyone at Meridian know your identity? Dennis answered honestly. Very few. Were company executives aware? No. Were any personal relationships affected by maintaining that confidentiality? For the first time, Dennis paused. He knew exactly what the reporter was asking. He answered carefully. Confidential investigations require sacrifices. Sometimes those sacrifices are personal. He offered nothing more. He refused to embarrass Audrey publicly, even now. The Attorney General concluded the press conference by presenting Dennis with the Department of Justice Distinguished Civilian Service Medal. Photographers captured the moment from every angle. Benjamin applauded beside him with unmistakable pride. Across America, millions of viewers saw the ceremony live. Within minutes, social media exploded. Who is Dennis Carter? Dropout to federal investigator hidden founder revealed. Secret cybersecurity billionaire. Former classmates began posting old university photographs. Former employees shared stories about his quiet generosity. Veterans of previous investigations praised his integrity. At home, Audrey remained motionless. Every memory suddenly rearranged itself. The worn jacket, the old pickup truck, the simple lunches, the refusal to boast, the mysterious paperwork, the confidence that never required applause. She remembered introducing him at her promotion party. "My husband is the only college dropout lucky enough to marry success." The words echoed painfully inside her mind. She hadn't simply underestimated him. She had misunderstood the very meaning of success. Her phone rang continuously. Co-workers, friends, journalists. She ignored every call. Instead, she opened her laptop. The Sentinel Integrity Solutions website had already been updated. There on the leadership page appeared a new photograph. Founder and chairman, Dennis Carter. Below the photograph was a short biography. Former engineering student. Founder of Sentinel Integrity Solutions. Architect of multiple nationally recognized forensic investigation systems. Recipient of numerous confidential federal commendations. Married, Chicago, Illinois. Nothing about wealth. Nothing about prestige. Nothing about personal accomplishments beyond service. It sounded exactly like Dennis. An hour later, the front door quietly opened. Dennis stepped inside carrying the same old leather tool bag he always carried. The only difference was the metal resting inside a small presentation case. Audrey stood waiting. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, she whispered, "Was it really you?" Dennis nodded once. "Yes." "For all these years?" "Yes." She struggled to find words. "You paid for Harvard. You built Sentinel. You investigated Meridian. You protected me. And you never once tried to prove me wrong." Dennis slowly walked closer. "I wasn't trying to win against you. I was trying to protect you." Tears streamed down her face. "I humiliated you." "You honored me." He gently took her hands. "I loved you before either of us had titles." "I still do." She looked into his eyes, overwhelmed by both admiration and regret. The secret that had defined 12 years of their marriage had finally disappeared, but now another challenge stood before them. The truth had been revealed to the world. The harder question was whether two people changed by ambition, sacrifice, silence, and forgiveness could rebuild a marriage strong enough to outlast everything that success had almost destroyed. The days following the press conference changed Dennis and Audrey's lives in ways neither of them had anticipated. The headlines gradually shifted away from the criminal investigation and toward the extraordinary story behind the man who had remained invisible for more than a decade. Business magazines published profiles of Sentinel Integrity Solutions. National television programs requested interviews. Universities invited Dennis to deliver commencement speeches. Every invitation received the same polite response. "Thank you. Unfortunately, I must decline." Benjamin laughed each time another request arrived. "You know, most CEOs spend millions trying to get this kind of publicity." Dennis smiled. "And I've spent 12 years trying to avoid it." "You still can." "I know. But some things have changed." They stood together inside Sentinel's headquarters, overlooking downtown Chicago. The office reflected Dennis perfectly. No marble floors, no oversized executive suite, no extravagant artwork. Every dollar had been invested in technology training and people rather than appearances. Benjamin leaned against the conference table. "The board has a proposal." Dennis raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried? They want you to become public chairman." "I already am." "I mean publicly." Dennis understood. His identity was no longer classified within the business community. Clients wanted to meet the founder whose reputation had quietly shaped the company. After several moments of thought, Dennis answered, "I'll attend meetings when necessary. But Benjamin, you stay CEO." Benjamin smiled. "I wasn't planning on leaving." "Good. Our partnership still works." It had always worked because neither man had been interested in personal recognition. Their friendship had been built on mutual respect rather than ambition. Across town, Audrey attended her first meeting with Meridian's newly appointed interim board. The atmosphere was completely different from previous executive sessions. Transparency replaced politics. Questions replaced assumptions. The interim chairperson addressed the room. "Our priority is rebuilding trust." He looked toward Audrey. "Miss Carter, we've completed our review of your compliance history." She listened quietly. "The independent investigators concluded that you consistently attempted to strengthen oversight." He paused. "Your recommendations, if implemented, would likely have prevented much of the fraud." Audrey lowered her eyes. "I wish I had pushed harder." The chairman shook his head. "You pushed. The wrong people stopped listening." Another board member spoke. "The board unanimously voted yesterday." Audrey looked up. "We would like you to remain with Meridian." She appeared surprised. "I thought I would be asked to resign." "No. We need leaders who ask difficult questions." She remained silent for several seconds. Then she answered honestly. "I'm honored. But I need time." The chairman nodded. "We understand. For now, focus on your family." When Audrey returned home that afternoon, she found Dennis repairing the old wooden fence in their backyard. She smiled. "You hired contractors for million-dollar projects, but you still repair your own fence." Dennis laughed. "It keeps me humble." She picked up another paintbrush. "Need help?" "Manor." "I'd like that." For nearly 2 hours they worked side by side. No reporters, no executives, no investigations. Just two people rebuilding something one board at a time. Finally, Audrey broke the comfortable silence. "I met with Meridian today." "How did it go?" "They offered me my position back." Dennis looked at her. "What do you want?" She appreciated the question. Not what should she do, what did she want? "I've been thinking about that." She carefully set down the paintbrush. "For years I chased titles. I kept believing the next promotion would finally make me feel successful. And it never lasted." Dennis nodded knowingly. "I understand." She smiled. "I think you always understood." She looked around their small backyard. "This house. Our life. Our marriage. I almost traded all of it for recognition that disappeared in a single news cycle." Dennis gently squeezed her hand. "You still have a choice." "I know." That evening they walked along the Chicago River without security photographers or formal schedules. A few people recognized Dennis. Most simply smiled. One elderly man approached. "Mr. Carter?" Dennis nodded. The man extended his hand. "I worked in accounting at Meridian. I was terrified I'd lose everything. Your investigation protected those of us who were just doing our jobs." "Thank you." Dennis shook his hand warmly. "You earned that protection." The man walked away. Audrey quietly watched the exchange. "He thanked you." Dennis smiled. "He thanked everyone." "No. He thanked you." She suddenly realized something important. Dennis never measured success by how many people knew his name. He measured it by how many people could continue living ordinary lives because of work no one would ever see. That was leadership. Not applause, responsibility. Later that week, Sentinel announced a new scholarship program. Benjamin insisted Dennis stand beside him during the announcement. A reporter asked, "Why invest millions in scholarships instead of expanding internationally?" Dennis answered without hesitation. Because someone once invested in people instead of profits. He remembered Benjamin. The reporter continued. Who will receive the scholarships? Dennis smiled. Students who demonstrate character through sacrifice. Academic performance matters. But integrity matters more. Audrey listened from the audience. She knew exactly why he had created the program. Years earlier, someone had believed in a college student forced to abandon his education. Now Dennis intended to offer others the opportunity he had never received. After the event, Benjamin quietly approached Audrey. I owe you an apology. She looked confused. For what? I helped Dennis keep the secret. She smiled gently. I blamed him for that. Benjamin nodded. He hated lying to you. I know. He never actually lied. Benjamin looked relieved. He insisted the truth would eventually matter more than recognition. Audrey glanced toward Dennis, who was speaking with scholarship recipients. He was right. That night, while organizing old storage boxes in the attic, Audrey discovered another forgotten folder. Inside were copies of canceled tuition checks. Harvard University, every semester. Each one signed by Dennis. There were also letters she had never seen, recommendation requests, business school acceptance documents, budget calculations. A handwritten note tucked inside the final envelope caught her attention. It read, "One day she'll accomplish things even she can't imagine. If helping her means nobody notices my own dreams for a while, that's still a future worth building. Love isn't measured by what it costs, it's measured by what it creates." Dennis had written it years before their wedding, long before Sentinel became successful, long before anyone outside Benjamin believed in him. Audrey carefully folded the note. When Dennis came upstairs, she wrapped her arms around him. You built more than a company? He looked puzzled. What do you mean? You built the person I became? Dennis gently shook his head. No. You chose who you became. I just walked beside you. She smiled through tears. And now, he kissed her forehead. Now we keep walking. Outside, the lights of Chicago reflected across the river as another ordinary evening settled over the city. The investigations would eventually end. The trials would conclude. Companies would recover. Headlines would disappear. But the legacy Dennis truly cared about would not be found in court records, business magazines, or government medals. It would be found in every life quietly improved by choosing integrity over recognition, humility over pride, and service over applause. 1 year later, Chicago welcomed the first warm days of spring with bright sunshine and clear skies. Life had become wonderfully ordinary again. The federal trial had concluded months earlier. Richard Nolan and several co-conspirators received lengthy prison sentences after overwhelming evidence established their roles in orchestrating the procurement fraud. The court repeatedly praised the quality and integrity of the forensic investigation. More importantly to Dennis, the court also acknowledged the hundreds of employees who had been protected because investigators had carefully separated innocent professionals from those responsible for the crimes. Justice had been served without destroying an entire organization. That had always been his goal. Meridian Healthcare Technologies slowly rebuilt its reputation under new leadership. Instead of accepting her former executive position, Audrey made a different decision. She accepted a newly created role as Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. The position carried less prestige than Executive Vice President. It also carried something far more valuable: purpose. Every policy she introduced reflected lessons she had learned through painful experience. Every leadership meeting began with the same question: what decision would still make us proud if it appeared on tomorrow's front page? Employees quickly noticed the difference. Transparency became the company's strongest competitive advantage. Meanwhile, Sentinel Integrity Solutions continued expanding carefully. Dennis refused to measure success by revenue alone. Each new office opened only after leadership teams demonstrated the company's culture as thoroughly as its technical expertise. Benjamin still served as chief executive officer. Although the world now knew Dennis was the founder and chairman, visitors often found him walking through the building carrying coffee for interns or helping engineers solve technical problems. New employees frequently mistook him for a senior consultant. Nobody corrected them immediately. Dennis preferred introductions to happen naturally. One Monday morning, Sentinel welcomed the first class of Carter Integrity Scholars. 20 students from across the country gathered inside the training center. Some came from wealthy families. Others had overcome extraordinary hardship. Several had paused their education to care for relatives just as Dennis once had. The scholarship covered tuition mentorship internships and living expenses. Benjamin opened the ceremony. Today isn't simply about financial support. It's about belief. He smiled toward Dennis. Someone believed in this man when almost nobody else could see what he would become. Dennis reluctantly walked to the front of the room. Public speaking still made him uncomfortable. The students applauded. He waited until the room became quiet. I've been introduced with many titles over the past year. Founder, chairman, investigator. He smiled softly. My favorite title has always been student. Several young people exchanged curious glances. Dennis continued. I never finished college. A few students looked surprised. I once believed that meant my education had ended. I was wrong. The day you stop learning is the day your future becomes smaller than your past. The room remained completely silent. You don't need perfect circumstances. You need consistent character. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You only need to become the kind of person worthy of trust. He paused before adding one final thought. And when success finally arrives, treat people better than you did before you earned it. The students stood and applauded. Benjamin quietly smiled from the back of the room. That speech had revealed more about Dennis than any magazine profile ever could. Later that afternoon, Audrey arrived to surprise him for lunch. She found him sitting with scholarship recipients in the company cafeteria instead of the executive dining room. One student laughed. So you're really the founder? Dennis nodded. I suppose that's technically true? The young man grinned. You don't act like one. Dennis smiled. I hope I never do. After lunch, Audrey walked beside him through Sentinel's courtyard. I have something to show you. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a framed photograph. It had been taken at her promotion party 1 year earlier. Dennis stood quietly in the background wearing his simple jacket, while Audrey accepted her award. She had written something beneath the photograph. Success without humility is only applause. Success with integrity becomes a legacy. Thank you for teaching me the difference. Love always, Audrey. Dennis looked at her. You kept this picture. I almost threw it away. What changed your mind? She smiled. I realized I shouldn't erase my biggest mistake. I should remember what it taught me. Dennis carefully placed the photograph back into the envelope. I'll keep it. Good. So will I. That evening they returned home together. The old leather tool bag still rested near the front door. It had become something of a family joke. Audrey had offered dozens of times to replace it. Dennis always refused. Finally, she understood why. Some possessions carried memories more valuable than money. During dinner, the television played quietly in the background. A business news program featured Sentinel's scholarship initiative. The anchor concluded the segment with a simple observation. Despite building one of America's most respected cybersecurity firms, Dennis Carter continues driving the same pickup truck he owned before becoming successful. Audrey laughed. They still can't understand you. Dennis shrugged. I like the truck. It has over 200,000 miles. It still works? She shook her head with a smile. You really are impossible." "I've heard that before." They both laughed. Later that night, they sat together on the back porch overlooking the quiet neighborhood. No reporters, no investigations, no hidden identities, only peace. Audrey rested her head on Dennis's shoulder. "If you could change one thing," she asked softly. "Would you tell me the truth earlier?" Dennis thought carefully. "I wish I could have." "But legally I couldn't." She nodded. "I know." "What about you?" he asked. "If you could change one thing." She answered immediately. "I would never have confused education with wisdom. Or income with value. Or titles with character." Dennis gently took her hand. "You learned." "So did I." They watched the sunset disappear behind the Chicago skyline. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Words were no longer necessary. The greatest victories of their lives had never appeared in newspapers. Not the federal investigation, not the hidden company, not the awards, not even the public revelation. Their greatest victory was choosing each other again after pride, silence, misunderstanding, and pain had nearly destroyed everything they had built. Some people believed the story was about a college dropout who secretly became a powerful businessman. Others believed it was about a successful executive who learned humility after public embarrassment. Both interpretations missed the deeper truth. The story had never been about wealth. It had never been about prestige. It had never been about proving someone wrong. It was about the quiet strength of keeping promises when nobody was watching. It was about sacrificing recognition so another person could chase a dream. It was about protecting innocent people even when revenge would have been easier. It was about understanding that character is revealed not by how loudly success announces itself, but by how gently it treats others after arriving. Degrees can open doors. Money can create opportunities. Titles can earn admiration. But none of those things can replace integrity, because the world eventually discovers what you have accomplished. The people who truly matter remember how you made them feel while accomplishing it. And in the end, the strongest foundation for any company, any marriage, and any life is not intelligence, influence, or success. It is the quiet decision to choose humility over pride and truth over appearance and love over ego every single day.